The massive crystal towers of the Vorthok Empire stretched toward the crimson sky of their dying homeworld. Inside the central command spire, the greatest minds of the galaxy had gathered for what many believed would be their final council meeting. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension and the metallic scent of fear. Admiral Kextel stood 12 feet tall, his blue crystalline skin crackling with bioelectric energy as rage coursed through his system. Brahms gestured wildly. At the holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber, the three-dimensional map showed the galaxy in all its terrible glory, entire star systems marked in blood red, indicating worlds that no longer existed. "Look at this." His voice boomed, each word echoing off the crystalline walls. The Kepler. Sector gone, the Andorian colonies consumed. 14 entire civilizations in just one solar cycle. He slammed his fist against the display with such force that hairline cracks appeared in the crystal surface. Billions of beings reduced to nothing more than raw materials for their expansion. High Counselor Morden, the eldest of the Vorthok. Leadership felt her ancient hearts struggling to maintain rhythm. Her normally steady voice wavered as she spoke. "We threw everything at them, Kexthal.
Our quantum disruptors that could tear apart matter at the subatomic level, they adapted.
In ours. Our dimensional shields that could deflect entire stars' worth of energy, they found weaknesses we didn't even know existed." Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species nodded in grim agreement. The tall, ethereal Zenthaki, with their glowing eyes, had seen their floating cities pulled from the sky. The heavily armored Rocktar had watched their impenetrable fortress worlds crumble like sand. Even the mighty hegemony rulers of 3 spiral arms had been forced to abandon their capital. "What about the temporal disruptors?" asked General Voxai, his reptilian features twisted with desperation. "Surely weapons that could alter the flow of time itself." "The Devourers exist outside normal temporal flow," Morden replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They seem to experience all possible timelines simultaneously. Our temporal weapons were less than useless. They were counterproductive." In the darkest corner of the chamber, a figure stirred. Ambassador Veltar of the Hegemony had remained silent throughout the meeting, but now he stepped forward. His species was known for their calculating intelligence, their ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. His silver skin reflected the light from the holographic display as he spoke. "There is one possibility we haven't explored," he said quietly. "One species we haven't contacted." The chamber fell silent. Every eye sensor and consciousness focused on the Hegemony ambassador. The humans from South 3 Veltar continued. "They're primitive by our standards, but they have something we've lost." Admiral Kexthal's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Humans, those barely evolved primates, they've only just discovered faster-than-light travel. Their weapons are crude projectile throwers and basic energy beams. What could such backwards creatures possibly offer against an enemy that has defeated our most advanced technologies?" Veltar's expression remained calm. "Perhaps that's exactly what we need. Someone too foolish to know when they're beaten. Someone who hasn't learned that some battles are impossible to win." The other council members exchanged glances. It was a desperate idea, born from desperation itself. "Their military history is unique," Veltar continued. "They've won wars they had no right to win. They've survived extinction events that should have wiped them out. They have a saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." Meanwhile, on the outer rim of human space, Captain Park Deho was completing his routine patrol aboard the UES Taekwondo. The ship was small. By galactic standards, barely 300 meters long, but it represented the pinnacle of human engineering. Its hull bore the scars of countless asteroid impacts and cosmic radiation, testament to humanity's still dangerous journey among the stars. Deho was reviewing supply reports when his communications officer, Ensign Lee Minwoo, suddenly straightened at his station. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission on the diplomatic frequency. It's not from Earth." The message that followed changed everything. Transmission was short, direct, and terrifying in its simplicity. Earth's survival depended on humanity's willingness to fight an impossible war against an enemy that had already conquered half the galaxy. Within hours, Lieutenant Commander Kim Sora was standing before her squadron in the briefing room of the military station orbiting Mars. The pilots before her were young, eager, and completely unprepared for what she was about to tell them. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her words. "We've been contacted by something called the Galactic Council. They're fighting a war against an enemy called the Devourers. This enemy has destroyed 14 civilizations in the past year." The pilots exchanged worried glances. Pilot Officer Nam Ji-woo raised his hand. "Commander, what do they want from us?" Kim Sora's expression was grim. "They want us to help them fight. But here's the thing. We're not going as allies. We're not going as equals. We're going as a last resort, because every other option has failed." The room erupted in whispers and concerned murmurs. These young pilots had trained to defend Earth from asteroids and space pirates, not to fight galactic wars against unknown enemies. "I won't lie to you," Kim Sora continued. "This mission is probably suicide. But if we don't go, if we don't try, then Earth will be next. The Devourers are coming for our sector whether we fight or not. At least this way we might have a chance." Human fleet that departed Earth 3 days later was modest by any measure. 50 ships carrying 10,000 volunteers, their hulls painted with the insignia of United Earth. They had no idea they were about to change the fate of the galaxy, or that their willingness to fight impossible odds would become the stuff of legend as they jumped to hyperspace, heading toward a war zone beyond their comprehension. The crew members carried with them something the galaxy had forgotten: hope born from stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. The Nexus Station was a marvel of galactic engineering that defied human understanding. Built around the dying red giant star Kepler 442. The massive structure stretched for thousands of kilometers in all directions. Its outer rings rotated slowly, creating artificial gravity for the millions of refugees who had fled their conquered homeworlds. The station's bioluminescent hull pulsed with a sickly orange light, powered by the dying star's final energy bursts. Commander Lee Jae-soon felt his stomach drop as the UES Taekwondo approached the docking bay. The human fleet looked like toys compared to the massive alien warships already docked at the station. Crystalline vessels from the Vorthok Empire stretched like frozen lightning bolts, their surfaces reflecting the star's dying light. The hegemonies. Ships were perfect geometric shapes that seemed to bend space around them. While the Dominion's massive dreadnoughts bristled with weapons that could crack planets in half. "Jesus," whispered Lieutenant Park Hyun-soo from the navigation station. "Look at the size of those things. Our entire fleet could fit inside one of their cargo holds." Lee Jae-sung straightened his simple blue uniform and checked his sidearm. Unlike the elaborate ceremonial weapons the aliens carried, his was a basic projectile pistol that would have been familiar to soldiers from Earth's 20th century. Remember, he told his crew, "We're not here to be impressed. We're here to do a job." The docking bay was a cathedral of alien architecture. Towering pillars of living crystals supported a dome that seemed to contain its own miniature starfield. Hundreds of alien species moved through the space, their forms ranging from the beautiful to the bizarre. Some floated on anti-grav platforms, others walked on multiple legs, and a few existed as pure energy contained within mechanical shells. Commander Lee's boots echoed on the metal deck as he approached the gathering of alien leaders. The contrast was stark and intentional, where the aliens wore robes embedded with precious metals, energy fields that shifted color with their emotions, or biomechanical suits that enhanced their natural abilities. Lee wore a simple military uniform with cloth rank insignia and a name tag. Printed in basic English letters, High Admiral Zekmer of the Dominion stood at the center of the group, his massive frame encased in power armor that hummed with contained energy. His species had evolved from predators, and even now, facing extinction, he maintained the arrogance of an apex hunter. His 6 eyes fixed on Lee with obvious distaste. "So," Zekmer's voice rumbled through his suit speakers, "these are the famous humans. Smaller than I expected." "You called for our help," Lee said flatly, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. "Here we are." Zikmer's laugh was a sound like grinding metal. Help. You misunderstand your role here, Primitive. You're here too. Buy us time while we evacuate the remaining civilian populations. Nothing more. Your ships will serve as a distraction, while our real fleets prepare for strategic withdrawal. The other alien leaders nodded in agreement. General Voxai of the Reptilian Confederation flicked his forked tongue dismissively. At best, you might slow them down for a few hours. At worst, you'll simply provide them with more raw materials. Dr. Yoon Haewon had been quietly studying the tactical displays that surrounded the meeting area. The holographic projections showed the Devourers advance in terrifying detail. Unlike the clean, purposeful movements of the alien fleets, the Devourers' ships moved like a disease spreading through healthy tissue. My God, she whispered to Major Cho Minho, who stood beside her. They're not just destroying civilizations. They're consuming them. Look at these energy readings. They're breaking down matter at the molecular level and using it to fuel their expansion. Cho Minho, a veteran of Earth's resource wars, understood the implications immediately. They're strip mining entire star systems. Every ship they destroy, every planet they consume, makes them stronger. They're like a cancer, Yoon continued, her voice filled with growing horror. But every cancer has a weakness. There has to be something we can exploit. The briefing continued for hours. The aliens provided detailed technical specifications of their failed weapons and defensive systems. Their quantum disruptors, capable of unraveling matter at the subatomic level, had been adapted to within hours of deployment. Their dimensional shields, which could deflect the energy output of entire stars, had been bypassed by weapons that shouldn't have been able to exist. They learn, explained Ambassador Veltar of the Hegemony. Every tactic we use, every weapon we deploy, they analyze and counter. It's as if they can see every possible outcome of a battle before it even begins. Commander Lee listened to it all with growing frustration. These aliens had technology that seemed like magic to human eyes, but they were fighting like humans. Had in the early days of warfare meeting strength with strength, technology with technology. 3 days later, the first test came. A Devourer scout patrol had been detected approaching the system's outer planets. The alien commanders saw it as an opportunity to test their new human auxiliaries in a low-risk situation. Pilot Officer Nam Gi-woo led the first human squadron into combat. His fighter, the U.S. Soul, was a sleek craft barely 30 meters long. Armed with conventional missiles and a single plasma cannon that the aliens considered laughably primitive, the Devourer ships were unlike anything in human experience. They moved like living creatures, their black holes seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their weapons were streams of energy that converted matter into more of themselves, growing stronger with each shot they fired. Holy shit, Nam, Ji-woo muttered as his fighter's hull began to glow under the enemy's energy beams. These things are trying to eat my ship. His instruments were failing one by one as the Devourer weapons began their molecular conversion process. Any sane pilot would have retreated, called for backup, or at least tried to maintain distance while firing long-range weapons. Instead, Nam Ji-woo did something that no alien in the galaxy's recorded history had ever attempted. He aimed his crippled fighter directly at the nearest Devourer ship and pushed his engines to maximum burn. "This is for Earth, you bastards," he shouted over the cum as his fighter's hull began to buckle under the strain. The collision should have destroyed both ships. Instantly. The Devourer vessel was 3 times the size of the human fighter, with armor that had withstood direct hits from weapons that could vaporize mountains. But something unexpected happened. The moment Nam Ji-woo's fighter made contact, the Devourer ship began to malfunction. Its perfect coordinated movements became erratic and chaotic. Systems that had functioned flawlessly for millennia began to fail in cascade failures. The ship's ability to process and adapt to new information seemed to break down completely. The hell? Nam Ji-woo found himself alive in the wreckage of his cockpit, watching through a cracked viewport as the Devourer ship spun helplessly through space before going completely dark. "Commander," Lee's voice crackled over the comm system. "Did you see that? All units, confirm what you just witnessed." The response came back from every human ship in the area. The Devourer vessel, invincible just moments before, was now nothing more than dead metal drifting in space. They're not invincible, Lee transmitted to the entire fleet. They just think they are. In the command center of Nexus Station, the alien leaders watched the tactical displays in stunned silence. In 3,000 years of warfare, no one had ever successfully destroyed a Devourer ship in single combat. The implications were staggering. How? High Admiral Zeekmer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How did a primitive projectile weapon succeed where our most advanced technology failed? Dr. Yoon-Hae-won was already analyzing the sensor data, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe that's exactly the point, she said quietly. Maybe being primitive is exactly what we need. The war room aboard Nexus Station had been transformed into something the aliens had never seen before, where their command centers were pristine. Temples of order and efficiency, the human section looked like organized chaos. Coffee cups and energy drink cans littered every surface. Hand-drawn diagrams covered the walls alongside holographic displays. The air smelled of human sweat, determination, and something the aliens couldn't identify. Desperation mixed with excitement. General Bae Soon-min stood at the center of it all, his weathered face marked by 3 sleepless days of planning. Uniform was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made even the towering alien commanders step back. Round him, dozens of holographic displays showed battle simulations that defied every known principle of military strategy. "Gather around," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought in Earth's bloodiest conflicts. "I'm going to show you something that will either save this galaxy or get us all killed." The alien leaders approached cautiously. High Admiral Zeekmer's power armor hummed with barely contained energy. Ambassador Veltara's silver skin reflected the holographic light as he studied the displays with growing confusion. General Voxai's reptilian eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of the human tactical formations. "This is madness," Zeekmer muttered, his mechanical voice filled with disgust. "These aren't battle plans. They're useless." "Exactly," Bae Soon-min smiled, and there was something terrifying in that expression. "We call it chaos doctrine. The Devourers rely on predictive algorithms. They analyze patterns, calculate probabilities, and adapt accordingly. They've beaten you because you fight like computers. Logical, predictable, efficient." He gestured to a holographic display showing the Devourer fleet movements. "Look at this. Perfect formation flying. Optimal weapon deployment. Mathematical. Precision in every maneuver. They're fighting a war like it's a chess match." "As it should be," Veltar interjected. "Warfare is about minimizing casualties while maximizing effectiveness. Your species' primitive approach to conflict has kept us alive when it should have killed us." Bae Soon-min interrupted. "Humans don't follow patterns. We don't optimize. We improvise. We adapt. We do stupid things that work for reasons we don't understand. That's exactly what these Devourers can't predict." The first full-scale test of chaos doctrine came at the Battle of Kepler 442, where a massive Devourer fleet had surrounded the mining colonies of the outer system. The alien fleets took their traditional positions, the Vorthok Empire's crystal, ships forming perfect geometric patterns, the Hegemony's vessels arranging themselves in mathematically precise formations that maximized their weapons' effectiveness. The human fleet looked like a swarm of angry insects by comparison. Their ships moved in seemingly random patterns, breaking formation at will, accelerating and decelerating without apparent logic. Captain Seo Taeyong's destroyer, the EU's Busan, led the charge with a maneuver that made the alien observers gasp in horror. "All units, execute pattern Delta 7, she commanded over the com. "And remember, if it makes sense, you're doing it wrong." The Devourer fleet responded exactly as predicted. Their ships began calculating interception courses, predicting human movement patterns, adapting their formations to counter what they perceived as chaotic but ultimately logical tactical decisions. They had defeated similar random strategies from younger civilizations before, but the humans weren't being random. They were being chaotic. and chaos follows different rules than randomness. Lieutenant Hong Kate's fighter squadron demonstrated this perfectly. Instead of engaging the Devourer ships at optimal range with maximum firepower, they flew directly into the enemy's energy beams. The alien observers watched in horror as human fighters were consumed by weapons that converted matter into energy. "They're committing suicide," General Voxai hissed. "This is not strategy. This is madness." But something strange was happening. As the human fighters were destroyed, their fusion reactors overloaded in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The energy feedback created cascading failures in the Devourer weapon systems. Ships that had functioned perfectly for millennia began experiencing system failures. "You see," Bei Seung-min pointed to the tactical display. "They're trying to adapt to our tactics, but they can't predict the unpredictable." Hong's squadron just used their own destruction as a weapon. The battle raged for 6 hours. The human fleet fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They used their own damaged hulls as projectiles, ramming crippled ships into enemy formations. They fired their weapons in seemingly random directions, creating crossfire patterns that confused the Devourer targeting systems. Most shocking of all, they deliberately triggered explosions in their own ranks to create electromagnetic interference that disrupted the enemy's communication networks. When the UES Incheon's reactor was hit, Captain Kim Jo-yeon didn't try to contain the explosion. Instead, he steered his dying ship toward the center of the Devourer formation and detonated it manually. "This is insane," High Admiral Ziegmer transmitted to the human fleet. "You're destroying your own ships." "That's the point," replied Captain Seo Tae-young, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "They can't adapt to tactics that don't make sense. Look at your display. Their formation is collapsing." She was right. The Devourer fleet, which had moved with perfect coordination at the beginning of the battle, was now struggling to maintain any semblance of order. Their ships were firing on each other, their targeting systems confused by the electromagnetic interference. Their perfect algorithms were failing because they couldn't process the concept of deliberate self-destruction. As a tactical advantage, human casualties are at 60%, reported Medical Officer Park The-jin, her voice steady despite the horror of the numbers. But the Devourers have lost their first major fleet in 3,000 years. The alien leaders watched in stunned silence as the remaining Devourer ships began to retreat. It was the first time in recorded history that the enemy had been forced to withdraw from a battle. "How?" Ambassador Veltar whispered. "How did you defeat an enemy that has conquered half the galaxy?" Bei Seung-min's smile was grim. "Because we're not trying to win efficiently. We're trying to win. Period." The Devourers understand perfect tactics, optimal strategies, mathematical warfare. They don't understand desperation, stubbornness, or the human ability to turn disaster into victory. The aliens began to whisper among themselves, their voices filled with a mixture of awe and horror. These humans weren't just willing to die. For their cause, they were willing to die badly, messily, and in ways that broke every rule of civilized warfare. "Your species is either the bravest or the most insane we've ever encountered," General Voxai said finally. "Maybe both," Bei Seung-min replied, "but we're still alive, and half the galaxy isn't. Sometimes crazy is exactly what you need." As the human survivors limped back to Nexus Station, the alien leaders realized that everything they thought they knew about warfare had just been turned upside down. The humans had won not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to fight by the rules that had governed galactic conflict for millennia. The war was far from over. But for the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy had hope. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every civilized world. Empire. Military commanders studied recordings of the Battle of Kepler 442 with growing excitement. On the floating cities of the Trilaxian Confederation, tactical analysts ran simulation after simulation, trying to understand how chaos could be weaponized. Within weeks, every major military force in the galaxy was attempting to copy human tactics. The Trilaxian fleet began what they called controlled chaos maneuvers, breaking formation in predetermined patterns. executing planned random movements that followed carefully calculated probability matrices. Their ships moved in ways that seemed chaotic, but were actually the result of complex algorithms designed to mimic human unpredictability. The Sector Alliance, masters of energy warfare for over 2 millennia, began retrofitting their ships with primitive kinetic weapons. Railguns and missile launchers, technologies they had abandoned centuries ago, were suddenly being mass-produced in their orbital factories. Their military doctrine, which had emphasized clean, efficient, energy-based combat, was hastily rewritten to include legacy weapon systems. Most surprising of all, the proud hegemony began deliberately sabotaging their own equipment. Their perfect, mathematically precise ships started carrying damage charges, explosives designed to create specific types of system failures that would make their behavior unpredictable. Their crews practiced controlled malfunction protocols, learning to fight with partially disabled systems, but something was wrong. Despite their efforts to copy human tactics, the alien forces were still losing battles against the Devourers. Their chaos was too organized, their randomness too predictable. They were trying to systematize the unsystematic, to create order from disorder. "They don't understand," General Bei Seung-min explained to Admiral Moon Bung-ho during a strategic briefing. "They're trying to program chaos like it's just another weapons system. But real chaos isn't something you can control, it's something you have to accept." The Devourers were learning too. Their vast collective intelligence analyzed every battle, every human tactic, every moment of chaos. They began to understand that the key wasn't the randomness itself, but the willingness to accept catastrophic losses in pursuit of victory. And they lacked the crucial element that made human tactics work: humanity's complete comfort with acceptable losses and controlled destruction. The response from the Devourers was swift and merciless. Deep in the galactic core, where ancient machines had slumbered for millennia, something stirred. The main Devourer fleet, a massive armada that had been dormant since their first conquest, cycles began to move. Their target was singular and clear: eliminate the source of the chaos before it could spread further. Admiral Moon. Byung-ho stood in the command center of the Seoul Defense Station, watching the long-range sensors with the calm expression of a man who had seen too many wars. The approaching fleet was beyond anything in human experience, thousands of ships, each one larger than Earth's biggest space stations, moving in perfect formation toward the solar system. "They're coming for Earth," he announced to his staff, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Estimated arrival: 6 days. The command center fell silent. Colonel Kong Yujin, Moon's second in command, was the first to speak.
Sir?
"What are our orders?" Moon studied the tactical display, showing the approaching enemy fleet. It was 50 times larger than anything humanity had ever faced. The combined might of every ship in the solar system would be like throwing pebbles at a mountain. But his expression never changed. "We make them pay for every meter of space," he said simply. "Signal all commands, total mobilization. Every ship, every weapon, every person who can hold a rifle. This is it." The Battle of the Asteroid Belt began 3 days later when the Devourer vanguard reached the outer edge of the solar system. Human forces had spent those 3 days turning the asteroid belt into the largest minefield in recorded history. Mining charges, originally designed to break apart asteroids for resource extraction, had been repurposed into massive kinetic weapons. Captain Lee Dong-wook commanded the mining vessel Gangwon, a ship that had never been designed for combat. As the Devourer scouts approached, he activated the charges embedded in asteroid 2547 Alpha. The explosion sent fragments the size of city blocks, hurtling through space at incredible velocity. "Direct hit on the lead ship," reported his sensor operator. "But they're adapting. Look at the formation." The Devourer fleet was already changing its approach, using smaller ships as shields, calculating safe corridors through the debris field. Their adaptive algorithms were working exactly as designed. "Time for Plan B," Captain Lee muttered, and aimed his mining ship directly at the largest asteroid cluster. The Gangwon's hull groaned under the stress as he pushed the engines beyond their safety limits. The impact created a chain reaction that turned dozens of asteroids into a deadly cloud of debris. This pattern repeated throughout the asteroid belt. Human ships, never designed for warfare, became weapons of mass destruction. The crew of the UES Docto used their ship's industrial lasers to destabilize asteroid cores, creating massive explosions that sent shockwaves through the Devourer formation. The cargo vessel used Pusan, loaded itself with mining explosives, and detonated in the middle of an enemy squadron. But the Devourers were learning, adapting, overcoming each new tactic within hours of its deployment. Their massive ships began to punch through the debris field, their weapons converting the asteroid fragments into raw materials for their expansion. It was then that Commander Oh Seung-hwan made the decision that would haunt the galaxy forever. From his command ship in the inner system, he watched the tactical display showing the Devourer fleet's steady advance. They were adapting to the asteroid field, finding safe corridors, using their superior technology to overcome human desperation. "Sir?" His communications officer, Lieutenant Kim Hae-jin, approached with a message tablet. Her hands were shaking. Mars Colony Beta is requesting permission to evacuate. They have 10,000 civilians, including families with children. Oh Seung-hwan looked at the tactical display, then at the orbital mechanics calculations on his secondary screen. Mars Colony Beta was positioned perfectly to create a debris field that would slow the Devourer advance by critical hours. Those hours might be enough to complete the evacuation of Earth's population centers. "Negative," he said quietly. "Signal Mars, Colony Beta. Tell them they're going to be heroes." Lieutenant Kim's face went pale. "Sir, there are own people. There are children on that station." "I know," Oh Seung-hwan replied, his voice steady despite the weight of his decision. "Signal all units. Prepare for Operation Falling Star." The communications channel crackled with static as the connection to Mars Colony Beta was established. Administrator Park Jin-ho's voice came through, calm and clear. "We understand, Commander. We've been watching the tactical displays. We know." "What needs to be done, Administrator?" Oh Seung-hwan's voice caught slightly. "You don't have to." "Yes, we do," Park interrupted. "We volunteered when we came out here. We all did. Tell our families we died protecting Earth." The explosion of Mars Colony Beta created a debris field 50,000 kilometers wide. The station's fusion reactors overloaded in a carefully controlled sequence, sending fragments of the colony spinning through space with enough velocity to punch through Devourer holes. 10,000 human lives ended in an instant. But their sacrifice created a barrier that would slow the enemy advance for precious hours. The alien observers watching from Nexus Station were horrified. Ambassador Veltara's silver skin had turned, almost black with shock. High Admiral Zeekmer's power armor was silent for the first time since the war began. "They sacrificed their own colony," General Voxai whispered. 10,000 of their own people. "They volunteered," came the quiet transmission from Commander Oh Seung-hwan. They all volunteered. The aliens began to understand something terrifying about humanity. These weren't just warriors willing to die for their cause. They were a species willing to sacrifice their own kind with the same calculating coldness they showed toward their enemies. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were fighting extinction, and they would pay any price to survive. The battle for Earth had only just begun. The journey to the galactic core took 3 months, and every day brought reports of more worlds falling to the Devourers. The combined armada that assembled at the edge of the core was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 30 different species had contributed their finest warships, creating a fleet that stretched across light years of space. The human contingent was small but visible at the fleet's heart. Captain Lim Junasu stood on the bridge of the UES Wangzan, a cruiser that had been rebuilt specifically for this mission. Every inch of the ship's hull was covered in additional armor plating, quantum, shields, and the most advanced weapons humanity could produce. But none of that mattered as much as the device secured in the ship's core. Dr. Yoon. Haewon's quantum disruption device was the size of a small building. A maze of crystalline components and energy conduits that hummed with barely contained power. 3 months of work by the galaxy's greatest minds had gone into its creation. But the principle was simple. If you could introduce enough quantum chaos into the Devourer network, their perfect coordination would collapse. Remember, Admiral Moon's voice crackled over the long-range come from Earth. Someone has to stay behind to manually activate the device. The automated systems won't work in that much quantum interference. The person who does this, they're not coming back. The silence on the bridge was deafening. Everyone knew this was a suicide mission, but somehow hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Captain Lim looked around at his crew, men and women who had volunteered for this mission knowing they would probably die. "I'll do it," came a quiet voice from the back of the bridge. Pilot Kim Jamin stepped forward, his young face set with determination that belied his 23 years. He had been fresh from the academy when the war began, full of dreams about exploring the galaxy and making contact with alien civilizations. Those dreams had died when the Devourers attacked the outer colonies, taking his parents, his sister, and his childhood friends. "Son," Captain Lim said gently. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Kim interrupted. "They took everything from me. My family, my home, my future. This is how I get it back." The Devourer Nexus was a nightmare made manifest. The structure at the galactic core was larger than most planets, a writhing mass of mechanical tendrils and energy conduits that stretched across thousands of kilometers. It pulsed with a malevolent intelligence, coordinating the actions of billions of Devourer units across the galaxy. As the combined fleet approached, the Nexus began to respond. Defensive platforms that had been dormant for millennia came online, their weapons systems charging with energy that made stars look dim by comparison. The first wave of defenders launched from the Nexus surface, ships that were living extensions of the Central Intelligence. Moving with perfect coordination, all units. Attack pattern Delta. Admiral Zekmer's voice boomed across the fleet communications. For the galaxy. The battle that followed was carnage on a scale that defied comprehension. The Vorthok Empire's crystal ships shattered against the Nexus defenses, their crews dying in brilliant explosions of light and energy. The hegemony's perfect formations were torn apart by weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The Trilaxian Confederation's floating cities, turned into massive weapons platforms, were consumed by energy beams that converted their entire populations into raw materials. But through it all, the human ships kept advancing. The UES Huangzhon pushed through the chaos, its hull glowing white-hot from repeated energy impacts. Captain Lim watched his crew work with desperate efficiency, knowing that every second counted. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported Lieutenant Park Soonjo, his voice steady despite the alarms blaring around them. "We're losing atmosphere. Seal it off," Lim ordered. "We're not stopping." The human fighters led the charge, their pilots singing old war songs as they flew into certain death. The U-Seoul, the UES, Daegu. The EU's Gwangju ships named after Earth's cities threw themselves at the Nexus defenses, their crews determined to clear a path for the main assault. Lieutenant Colonel Han Sujin's bomber squadron made the crucial breakthrough. Flying through a gap in the defensive fire, they managed to damage one of the Nexus's primary shield generators. The explosion created a window of opportunity that lasted only seconds. "Now," Captain Lim shouted. "All power to engines." The UES Wangzhon shot through the gap like a bullet, its hull screaming under the stress of maximum acceleration. Behind them, the rest of the human fleet followed, their ships forming a protective corridor through the chaos. Kim Jamin was all ready. In his fighter, the quantum disruption device, loaded into a specially modified payload bay. His hands shook slightly as he performed the final systems check, but his voice was steady when he spoke into the com. "This is Pilot Kim Jamin. I'm beginning my final approach." The Nexus loomed before him, a structure so vast that it seemed to fill the entire universe. Its surface was covered in mechanical tendrils that writhed like living things. And deep within its core, he could see the pulsing light of the Central Intelligence. Jamin, Captain Lim's voice came through the static. "You don't have to do this alone. We can find another way." "No," Kim replied, his fighter diving toward the Nexus surface. "This is the only way. I tell my family. Tell them I wasn't afraid. The Nexus defenses converged on the single fighter energy beams that could vaporize mountains, focusing on the tiny human craft. Kim's fighter bucked and rolled under the assault, its armor melting away layer by layer. Warning lights flashed red across his instrument panel, but he kept flying. "This is for Earth," he whispered, and flew directly into the structure's core. The quantum disruption device detonated with the force of a small star. The explosion raced through the Devourer network at faster-than-light speeds, introducing chaos into systems that had operated with perfect order for millennia. Across the galaxy, Devourer ships suddenly stopped moving, their coordination broken, their collective intelligence shattered. But the energy release was so massive that it ignited gas clouds throughout the galaxy, creating a chain reaction of stellar formation that turned the night sky into a tapestry of newborn stars. The explosion was visible from every world in the galaxy, a brilliant flash that marked the end of the Devourer threat. When the fires finally died down, the galaxy was transformed. New stars burned where none had existed before, their light carrying the promise of new worlds and new civilizations. The Devourers were gone, their network destroyed, their ships now nothing but dead metal, drifting in space. The surviving civilizations began the long process of rebuilding. On 1,000 worlds, monuments were erected to the fallen, especially the humans who had sacrificed everything to save a galaxy that had initially dismissed them as primitive. The name Kim Jamin was spoken with reverence in 100 languages, a symbol of courage that transcended species, but they also remembered the lesson that humanity had taught them. Sometimes salvation comes not from the strongest or the smartest, but from those willing to burn everything down to achieve victory. The galaxy had been saved by humanity's greatest strength, their refusal to accept the impossible, and their willingness to pay any price for freedom. In the years that followed, as new civilizations arose on the worlds illuminated by the newborn stars, they would tell stories of the small blue planet called Earth, and the species that had saved them all by being too stubborn to surrender. The galaxy was free, purchased with human blood and human sacrifice. It was a victory that would never be forgotten, in a debt that could never be repaid. The end.